Hi everyone, just wanted to do a quick summary for last week, week 4. Uh, Last week was our last week of non full time medical terminology stuff. Hopefully, you enjoyed learning about the cultural competency work. And I just wanted to speak briefly about the case study. I'll put some notes, obviously, in your grading on the blog. But the case study that we reviewed, it was certainly somewhat startling. It would be nice to be able to have an opportunity to do a more in-depth review of that. But so the issue that was faced by that administrator was significant. Obviously, it would be uh, it's a problem for most places that to face those types of issues, and oftentimes when there's disparities of that nature in an area, uh, it's usually access. So when there's significant disparities due to maybe there's lower income sections of a large community, and this is for those of you that are in the Pittsburgh area. There's obviously some lower income sections of Metro Pittsburgh where there isn't as good access to clinic services. And unfortunately, you don't, even UPMC, Allegheny Health Network, they're not as interested in putting clinics in the lower income areas because they're not making money on those. That's just the nature of the business that this is. So access isn't there for some of these more vulnerable populations. So when we have a situation where we have poor outcome figures for folks that are in these more vulnerable populations or for minorities that are of lower income that live in these areas, that is often why. It's often an access issue. They don't have access to follow up. However, as we saw in the data in this case study, that wasn't the case. What we were seeing, like for example, the data, and I don't have the case study in front of me, but I made a note here with discharge instructions. And discharge instructions for, I think it was Hispanic patients, they were being given discharge instructions at a much lower percentage than white patients, which is completely unacceptable. So those types of issues really need to be dealt with, promptly. And unfortunately, as he found, they also did a readiness for change assessment, which showed that they simply weren't ready for change. So those two things together are problematic. Now, what this organization needs to do is implement some change theory. Now, we haven't really done any change theory. Change theory tends to be something that you'll probably address. Hopefully, when you go on to grad school, you'll probably learn a lot about change theory. But there's a change theory by Lewin that talks a lot about. There's a process by what they call unfreezing, where you'll unfreeze the organization. You'll go through some activities to unfreeze. Then you'll make change, and then you'll refreeze. And oftentimes, if you go through that unfreezing process and people are unwilling to unfreeze, it's time for them to move on. So sometimes that happens, and if they're just unwilling to participate in the change, sometimes it takes longer for some people to move ahead. But this is completely inappropriate behavior on behalf of many people in this organization. So this is the type of change that is required. And in the I noticed in the blogs, many had mentioned some cultural competency training, just like we're doing here in the class, and that is completely appropriate. Most organizations do now do cultural competency training for their staff, and that is a completely appropriate thing to do for folks. And oftentimes now people are doing competency training for all types of cultures. So you may run into folks from cultures that you may not even be aware of. And in this situation, they're dealing with cultures that folks we meet on the street every day, folks that we should be familiar with and understand their cultures. but there are definitely cultures that we may not be familiar with that have very interesting and different perspectives on healthcare that we may not be familiar with, that they should be training their staff on as well. So it sounds like they have a lot of issues at this particular organization that they need to deal with, and good work on discussing some of that in our blog. Also, in our discussion for last week, we talked a little bit about medical terms and medical terminology, and why it's important that we learn about that, and the importance of the kind of breaking it down into roots and prefixes, suffixes. And part of it's for ease in learning. It's really, I mean, that's not why they created it that way. It's because it comes from Latin, which is the root of all of these words, and that's the way that their words are created. But a lot of it's helpful that we learn it in that way, because if we can understand a portion of the word, and a lot of folks have mentioned this, it can really help us to understand that word. So if we understand what itis means, or otomy, or ectomy, we at least understand a portion of that word, and we can kind of dig down to try and figure the rest of it out. So it really can be helpful as we're learning to kind of dig in and learn more about just what the pieces of the words mean. It can help to aid in our understanding of what what the terms mean overall. And kind of the purpose of our learning these terms is really to speak the language of the clinician. As an administrator in a facility, if we can't speak the same language, or at least partially speak the same language as the clinician, it can ruin our credibility. So we really need to be able to speak that same language as the clinicians, and understand what the medical record is saying to us. And granted, we're not going to be able to treat the patient, but we could at least look at a note if there's an issue, and be able to understand a little bit about what it's saying. So this week we're going to continue on in the medical terminology. It'll be the rest of our work in the class, is medical terminology through lots of different body systems and organ areas, disease processes. So that's going to be the rest of our work in the class. So I noticed everyone got into the Evolve system, and hopefully you'll enjoy that. I think those kinds of exercises are fun. Hopefully you'll enjoy them. And I'll pull the grades over from there directly. You don't have to do anything to pull them over. So if you have any questions on that or on anything else, please let me know. I hope everyone has a fabulous Thanksgiving holiday, and I'll see everyone in the discussion boards. Thanks so much.